that thing. No countdowns here. We're just gonna do it live. I'm gonna wait for stream confirmation. There we are. Okay. Wait, no, that's not us. That's something.
Yeah, I see approaching Nirvana's logo and some people running around in Minecraft there. I'm on a delayed version of the stream though. You might be seeing something way
Oh, there
sooner.
we are. Yay! Hi everyone. How's it going? Welcome back to the land of non-music. So I'm Corey. If you've been watching the stream, you know who I am. But maybe you don't know, or maybe you do know who I have with me here today. I have with me Mr. Joe Hills, who will be my co-interviewer.
Howdy. Thanks for having me, Corey.
Yes. And we have Andy Whitworth, Dr. Andy Whitworth
Mhm.
from OSA Conservation. And I just want to say, by the way, the donations so far, over $6,000 raised, is incredible. So thank you to everyone for that. So we have Andy here. Andy is a National Geographic explorer and the executive director of OSA Conservation. His background is in tropical ecology, and he has lived and worked in the tropical rainforest for over 10 years and has published dozens of scientific papers on conservation ecology. So, Andy, we are super excited to have you here with us.
I'm super excited to be here. So thanks for having us, Corey, and it's a real pleasure.
Absolutely. So, $6,172.08. I know, especially focusing on that 8 cents, but the whole amount. Look
Hmm.
how much we've gotten so far. Could you give us, everybody watching, like a broad strokes view of where that money is going to?
Absolutely, and right down to every cent. So we put it all to great use, and we're a real kind of boots on the ground conservation organization. So we're very site based. We're focused down on the Osa Peninsula, which is in the southern region of Costa Rica. And the majority of our team are based in the field. So we're not an organization that's full of offices in Europe and the US. We've got a team of about 55 staff, and about 51 of those based down in the peninsula doing conservation work on the ground. And that's where we try and channel as many of those funds as possible. And this particular fund, we're trying to get going towards this mangrove restoration program, and it's a kind of program that we're trying to figure out how we can restore and bring back mangroves that were lost from the 1960s when they were felled down for mostly for firewood, but also how to help the livelihoods of the local people living around the mangrove system, and that's where the majority of this funding is going to go towards.
Oh, it sounds fantastic. And I see, Corey, before you ask your next question, we're already getting more donations rolling in. Biso just donated 25, who says, save the seas, save the trees. Nature isn't just an option, it's our home. Keep being amazing, everyone. Baba Tova says, go nature, and donated 15. And Nope Copter donated 10 and said, thanks for your hard work on making this awesome event happen. Hope it all goes well. So thank you to everybody.
Wow.
Take it
Amazing.
away, Corey.
Thank you all. Like, this is incredible seeing so many donations coming in. I love it. It's just constant coming in. I appreciate you all so much. Uh, so yeah, thank you for that overview of where the money's going. I think it's really nice for people watching the stream to really hear that firsthand from somebody who's working with it.
Well,
Um,
I've never restored a mangrove, so like this is a mangrove grove. I don't know if you just put like a little two in the upper right to shorten that, or what is the term for that biome? Is it a mangrove swamp? I believe.
Yeah, I mean it's a coastal forest system, and so
Mhm.
it's pretty. This is pretty simple, right? So if you're in a coastal system, an estuary system in the temperate regions, like way up in the North America,
Mhm.
your protective system there is the salt marsh,
Mhm.
and as soon as you get in the tropical regions, then those transform to mangrove forests, and they're
Oh,
basically that's the kind of difference between temperate and tropical areas. And so the mangroves are obviously these kind of giant forested coastal systems that protect our shorelines and act as these incredible nurseries for all the amazing fish and shark species.
Mm,
Very
cool.
cool. And so leading on about the mangroves, and specifically, you said that like mostly they were felled in the 1960s, which was quite a while ago.
Mhm.
Oh, not me being the professional interviewer unplugging my headphones during the interview. Oops. Okay. So, can you talk a bit about the mangrove restoration project, like when it started and what impact it's had on the people in the OSA?
Or
Uh,
and even just like what the action is.
Yeah,
Like, I don't know if
yeah.
it's planting trees or what does that look like?
yeah.
Yeah, so I'll tell you like a little bit of the story and the history. So this particular mangrove system in the Osa Peninsula is the biggest mangrove in the whole Pacific slope of Central America. It's
Mhm,
huge. It's called the Teraba del Sierpe. And we analyzed that mangrove system, um, and we found that there are around 2,000 hectares of that mangrove system that used to be mangrove and were felled, cut down for firewood. And then
mhm,
what happened is a very aggressive fern took control of those areas within the mangrove.
mm,
Now, the fern is natural within the system, but when you clear the mangroves too much, it takes over. And those ferns, I mean, I'm talking about a fern that's like, like twice as tall as I am. It's like 12 feet tall. So it just completely shrouds out and covers any of the propagules of the mangroves so that they can't regenerate.
oh,
So our job that you were talking about, Joe, the actual action is to go in with
mhm,
machetes. So these local guys go in with these big blades, and they have to
mhm,
cut down these ferns. Now the ferns have these rhizomes that are they're like a root nodular system, and they're
mhm,
almost impossible to clear out. So you have to come back and repeatedly clear every
mhm,
couple of months. It's really tough work in a very unstable system where you lose your wellies and fall into these big gullies of salt water. There's
mhm,
crocodiles in this system, so it's not without its threats. And
mhm,
you've got the sun beating down on you all day. And these guys, there's different methods that we use. In some areas, we completely clear the ferns. Other areas, we kind of do strips. And
mhm,
then some of the trees, some of the mangrove species do better if we just kind of plant the propagules straight into the ground, and they do
mhm,
very well. Whereas some of the other species, we kind of have to propagate them in bags and then transplant them out into this area. But the work's not finished there. Then we have to maintain those trees for at least 2 or 3 years until they get to a certain height that they can get above that aggressive fern
mhm,
and reach the sunlight, and then we can kind of leave them to kind of take it on their own, and they start propaguling, and then we get this
mhm,
kind of um, natural regeneration of the seeds that are being produced by our mangroves that we planted 3 or 4 years ago. And
mhm,
so in terms of how old this project is, we first started around 4 years ago was when we first kind of broke ground as part of this project, and started
mhm,
with the first kind of scientific trials to figure out what were the best strategies and approaches to remove the fern
mhm.
and establish the mangroves. And I've been back to visit some of those trees earlier this year, and they're way bigger than I am now, and they're producing their own seeds and little saplings growing underneath. So it's really neat to see the progress so far in the project.
That's just fantastic to hear. And it sounds like there's both a lot of manpower and just a lot of geographic area involved here.
Mhm.
One question, part of my role here for the chat is when you ask questions in the chat, we're not going to be able to acknowledge them right away. I'm kind of queuing them up. And so one of our first queued questions from the chat is from Apachella111, asking how the organization respects indigenous tribes. Because I'm assuming you would have to be interacting with people. You're talking about hiring people, you're talking about a big area. Could you go into that briefly?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's an interesting landscape where we work. In the lowlands, there's only one indigenous group on the peninsula
Hmm.
itself in a little community called Alta Laguna. And
Hmm.
then up in the mountains, there are kind of there's an indigenous group called the Baruka peoples. So they have their own kind of private lands, and then we obviously try and work with community members. Around 40 of our team are all Costa Ricans,
Hmm.
and so they work with the local community that we're talking about in the mangrove project is a little community called Ajuntaderas,
Mhm.
and they're traditionally what we call piangua farmers. So a piangua is a kind of bivalve, like a clam.
Mhm.
It's like a freshwater clam, and it's huge. And so they traditionally farm these bivalves, and they make like a delicious ceviche. They put some
Oh.
lime juice on there and a little bit of salt, and it's really good.
Mhm.
Um, and so it's the community that does the restoration work. So our team actually doesn't, go out there and do a lot of the macheting. We provide some kind of technical guidance, and we work with the community, and they receive the funds to actually
Mhm.
go out and do this restoration work. So the great thing about the program is it's supporting those local communities in the region to actually get involved and do the restoration work. And that means that they can kind of give some relief to the pianguas. So the
Mhm.
pianguas can kind of hopefully replenish their stocks. The mangrove's important habitat for the pianguas, so they're obviously improving the habitat of the produce that these communities depend upon. And then we've also helped this community in trying to establish a processing center so that they can actually store the pianguas in a safer way, so that they could store them in cool boxes for multiple days, which allows them time to get it straight to market, and they can kind
Nice.
of cut out the middlemen and
Mhm.
get better value for their product.
That's
Oh,
awesome.
that's fantastic. And yeah, sorry, one last thing, Corey, before I'll throw it to your next question. But we also got a donation from Josh Cool for $2.92, who says, Team No Sense Gang brings it to beautiful round numbers.
Yes, we have the Team Sense versus Team No Sense rivalry going on right now. If you're
Yeah,
not
that puts us,
familiar,
sorry, I was gonna say that actually puts us evenly at a very round number, $6,200.00.
yeah,
So y'all are awesome.
yes,
Well, and then immediately Mr. Rube decides to trash that by donating another $15.15. Who writes what looks like one of those chibi faces. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's like, oh, but anyway, so thank you, Mr. Rube, as well.
great. Thank you all
Back
for
to
the
you, Simon.
donations. Yes, of course. Man, I have so many thoughts thinking of this. I guess one of them actually I wanted to bring up is that we have these build milestones that we do throughout Love Tropics. Every few $1,000s, we set aside time to build something in the game. The first thing we did was actually cleared out a mangrove river that all the trees had gone away and was filled with the negrafora. So we cleared out a lot of the fern and we planted mangroves along this river. So now in the server, that river is full of mangroves again, kind of educating them on that thing. And also, we have a mangrove piangua processing plant that we're going to do. I can't remember if it's 6,000 or a bit later, but it'll happen. Don't worry. That's going to happen.
Super cool.
Yeah. So I heard you mention a word that I'm very fond of, and I hadn't heard it before starting this project, and it's propagule. I love this word. On Minecraft Live, I said propagule probably way too many times. And for people that in the chat somehow haven't heard me say propagule a million times, can you tell us like why mangroves are so important to reforest in the first place, and about propagule specifically, like what role they play in that?
Well, mangroves in general, the reason why they're so key is, I mean, there's multiple reasons why mangroves are so important to us. One being just the coastal defense. So if we get like high tides or aggressive oceans, and particularly on this Pacific region, there's very high energy waves that are coming in. And obviously, we've heard a lot recently in the news about climate change and how climate is becoming more unpredictable. More than ever, we need kind of what we call resilient ecosystems. And mangroves are absolutely one of those systems that provide barriers and safety to people living in coastal communities. Um, and then secondly, from a food security perspective, so a lot of the fish stocks that we depend upon, like red snappers, that a lot of local people will feed upon, their fry and the little fish will actually hide in those kind of root systems of the mangroves, and it provides protection for those little fish to be able to grow into big fish. So they're basically nursery crash areas for small fish fry to grow into bigger fish. So there's a food security element to this. And then I suppose a third element is the carbon that's stored within mangrove systems, within the trees and the soil storage layers. So we call it, it's referred to as blue carbon stocks because it's a kind of coastal stock of carbon. And the importance of carbon really is about holding on to that carbon that's in the atmosphere. So if you've got standing mangroves, they're obviously great stores of carbon, and these mangroves that we're planting are going to help to draw carbon down out of the atmosphere. And that's why we hear a lot about protecting forests and restoration of forests to kind of tackle climate change. And the cool thing about the propagules of mangroves is the way that they disperse in the water. So they, you've got the branches overhanging around the tidal system, and these things can drop into the water, and that's the way that they then travel and disperse through the system. And they can, last a long time as they're taken by the tides and moved to new areas where those propagules can kind of land and start a root system and inhabit a new area.
Cool. And what is it that makes the mangroves so uniquely more capable than other trees, for instance, or other plants at absorbing that carbon and holding it?
Well, I mean, they are as capable as other trees, but what's unique is the kind of the environment that they're enabled to inhabit. So these are very specialized trees that can deal with those salinity conditions of the salt water brought in by the ocean. And so that's really what's unique about these systems, is that they can inhabit this very harsh environment where, at some point in time, their roots are completely covered in salt water, and then the tide pulls out and they're not covered in salt water anymore. So they've got this very intense change in environment, and they're actually able to expel a lot of that salt through their leaves. You'll see a lot of the leaves on the mangrove trees turning like yellow, and they kind of drop off, and that's one of the ways that they can actually expel salt through their system as they're taking up salt water. And you can see there's different, we've got about 4 different mangrove species down there, and they can tolerate different parts of the tidal system. So some mangroves are more resilient when with higher tides and being covered in water more than some of the other more sensitive species. And then you get a kind of transition at the back of the mangroves where it kind of turns to forest. And there are a couple of specialist tree species that actually live on that transition zone between the coastal area and then the rainforest. And so one of those is a tree called Mora oleifera, and it has the biggest bean in the world. It's huge. It's like the size of my head. And that's a really beautiful tree that lives at the back of the mangrove system on the transition to the forest.
Awesome. One of the we have actually interviews with Andres, who's a scientist at OSA, and
Mhm.
hopefully the shuffle will work so that between segments it doesn't just show the one interview that it showed last time. But we have like 5 or 6 different clips, and in one of them he actually has Mora. You called it a bean, I guess, but
Yeah.
it's
It's the world's biggest bean.
it's so
Hmm.
big, it's
Yeah.
huge. So hopefully you all get to see that at some point during the stream.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing.
Joe, you had some fun
Sure.
questions.
Yeah. I saw that you guys have a bunch of visiting researchers come through and things like that, and that seems really cool. If anybody out there watching is studying in biology or conservation or anything, you should definitely check out some of the research opportunities. They have several research stations. There's like a whole map of them. I'm really impressed. But just to be more accessible for the broader audience who isn't a biologist, like Are there certain animals that when visitors come, they're immediately just like, oh my gosh, or like there's certain wildlife that's just everywhere, but then there's like a few things that maybe like you don't really get to see until you've been there for a while. Like what are the right away wildlife versus like the shy, like, oh, you're lucky if you get to see one of those type of things?
That's a cool question. That's a good question. So I think it's hard because I get spoiled, right? Because
Hmm.
I've lived, I've lived on Ossa now for 5 years. My house is in the middle of this forest, and so
Nice.
yeah, I suppose I get used to things. But what people that visit with us are always kind of shocked by that I kind of see every single day,
Hmm.
the spider monkeys. So
Oh.
we have this species of spider monkey called the Jeffroy spider monkey or the Central American.
Hmm.
And I literally see them every day, multiple times a day.
Hmm.
And everybody kind of freaks out when they see them. And I suppose I'm kind of spoiled really, but it is an endangered species. It's a
Hmm.
species that's threatened with extinction.
Hmm.
But Corcovado National Park and Ossa Peninsula is probably the biggest stronghold
Hmm.
and the greatest population of that very endangered species of primate.
Hmm.
And they're incredible. The way that they move through the canopy, it's a high canopy species.
Hmm.
The females do this amazing thing with the babies called bridging, where
Hmm.
they kind of, if they're going across a big tree gap, the female will grab with one hand and then with the back leg or the tail, and she lets the baby kind of bridge and scramble across her.
Huh.
Um, so I would say that's a species that is I see super common, and people are like, you're guaranteed to see it if you come down there.
Hmm.
Um, a little bit rarer. So what's very cool about the whole, if you think about the whole of Costa Rica,
Yeah.
the coolest thing about Ossa for me is that we still have jaguars and white-lipped peccary.
Hmm.
And everybody goes crazy for a jaguar, but it's going to be hard to see them. Their population's probably quite low, and they're
Hmm.
extremely secretive.
Oh, I'm sure.
And then kind of in the middle there are the white-lipped peccaries,
Hmm.
which you can see them, not as much as the spider monkeys and a little bit easier than the jaguar. But the
Hmm.
white-lipped peccaries for me are just incredible. They're this huge, they kind of look like a pig, right? And
Okay.
they go around in huge herds. So you
Hmm.
can get up to 100 of these pigs going around together.
Huh.
They've got huge tusks and teeth on them, and
Hmm.
it's one of the primary prey sources for the jaguar. And when you
Wow.
come across a herd of those things, it's like there's like a mini earthquake. There's so many of them, and they start snapping their teeth and clacking them together. It's uh, it's quite a it's quite a sight.
Wow, there's just so like I saw that this is one of the most biodiverse places on the planet, and just like the idea of getting to go somewhere and just casually see monkeys is like wild. But yeah, no, the jaguar, and I don't know how to pronounce, what was that, whitewood peccary? Did I, was that even close?
White lipped. So they've got
White
like
lip.
white around the
Ah,
mouth. White lip peccary.
gotcha, gotcha. Well, and hey, it looks like folks are getting excited about those animals. We just got a donation for $50.75 from Conkin5, who says, welcome back for another fantastic weekend of loving our beautiful tropical regions. Thanks, Kojo, Joe, and everyone from the team. My partner and I will be getting on soon. So thank you, Conkin5. And Anonymous donated 15. And so thank you very much, Anonymous, for that. You know, we didn't get a tip message, but we got the message. You want to help, and we appreciate it. So yeah, that brings us to a grand total of 62.80 and 90 cents.
Thank you so much, everybody. That's so appreciated.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, go ahead, Joe.
I was gonna say, so if anybody's on the Love Tropics Minecraft server and is like, I don't know what to make, go look up images of spider monkeys or jaguars or white-lipped peccaries. See, I'm learning. I'm
I
learning.
I was about
Yeah,
to
you
add
got it. You got it.
I was about to add on to that by saying we actually added 9 different mobs from the Osa into Tropicraft just for the event,
Oh,
including the spider monkey, the white-lipped peccary, and the jaguar.
yeah, and if
You got
somebody
them.
wanted to join that Minecraft server, Kojo, how much do they have to donate to get invited?
That would be $15, Joe.
$15. Ooh, so get on that, folks.
And that money
Oh,
goes
and
direct to Osa Conservation. Oh my goodness, and we're getting rated.
Mako and Nari rating with a party of 118. Welcome, Raiders. Kojo, do you want to introduce your guests?
Yes, absolutely. All right. Welcome to all the raiders. Mako and Ari will actually be hosting a Love Tropics segment later in the weekend. So welcome to the stream.
Awesome.
You'll be seeing more of us soon. Who we have here are myself, Kojo, Corey. I work at Minecraft. We have Joe Hills, who is a lovely content creator from the community, and we have Andy, Dr. Andy.
Dr. Andrew Whitworth,
Dr. Andrew Whitworth, who
the
is
executive director.
Yes, a National Geographic explorer and the executive director of OSA Conservation, which is the charity that we are supporting this weekend during Love Tropics.
And they're a fabulous beneficiary. We're mostly talking about the mangrove forest that OSA is going to be reforesting with this money. And so you're basically up to speed. If you like Costa Rica having rainforests or mangrove forests, and us all having cleaner air, more cool animals, it's a good time.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I was going to take that and add on to that with a question. The locals, I've watched a lot of interviews from OSA Conservation, or at least the ones that I've found, and one of the locals there said that he actually used to work deforesting the mangroves and now actually works to protect them. And I would love for you to tell like a little bit about that story. We do have an interview with him that we'll show at some point, but like a little bit about that story, but also just in general, like how the locals feel about this sort of like project as a overall thing.
Yeah, and I think you're talking about Adrian, who is he's the leader of the Piangueras community in Juntereras. So those guys, I mean, they've lived in that region for a long time. Adrian, I think, is probably in his mid 50s and spent his whole life farming these pianguas in the region. And so he was there when the communities needed to harvest firewood from the region when his family was around. So he was there part of that time when the mangroves were being cleared and they just needed wood for building or for firewood. And so now he's kind of leading the transformation of his community to try and work in activities like restoration, to want to harvest pianguas in a sustainable way. The communities themselves know that the piangua harvest is changing and that the numbers that they're able to harvest is reducing. And so they're kind of aware that there's too much pressure on them and that they want to look for alternative activities that they can spend their time doing, that they can support their own livelihoods. And so that's where I think generally when we look around the world and we see how much damage we've done to certain ecosystems, we can generate new markets and new economies by helping local people in these landscapes to do constructive rather than destructive activities. And so most community members or anybody that lives in these kind of rural landscapes, if you give them an opportunity to earn a living doing something that works more in line and sustainably for nature and for their own homes, they want to jump at that opportunity. And obviously there's always challenges. There'll always be some cultural issues around, hunting and people that want to use the landscape in a different way. But honestly, from what I've seen in OSA, it's been an incredible transformation in many of the communities there. And a lot of people who now make a living as tour guides, working in the ecotourism lodges in the region. And a lot of people that have turned from wanting to hunt wildlife, with a shotgun and chase it with a camera instead. And it's an incredible transformation.
As a follow-up to that, you've mentioned repeatedly like the mangroves started getting cut down in the 60s because of a lack of firewood and building materials. Can you talk about what the alternatives are that the locals are using today for heat and construction?
Well, yeah, I mean, so it was a lot of pressure on charcoal production and also clearing for for banana and other kind of crops like rice and pineapple, and those pressures kind of are still there. But the great thing is that this whole area now is protected.
Mhm.
It's basically like a national park.
Mhm.
So those kind of activities are not legalized anymore. Um, so in terms of building materials, there's obviously alternatives with brick and other wood materials that are harvested from timber plantations.
Mhm.
But it was the protected area system that's been established is a great thing because it gives protection to those existing mangroves. And
Mhm.
also we know that every mangrove that we replant isn't going to be cut down again because it's got a level of protection now.
Mhm. But nobody's freezing to death over it, is they? Well, I mean, it's Costa
No,
Rica, but yeah,
no, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
That's
But it
great.
was mostly for kind of export. Like so they weren't
Oh,
using it, they weren't using the charcoal in the local region. That was
gotcha.
being exported, yeah.
That was just a sale thing. Got it. Okay,
Exactly, exactly.
I,
cool. Thank you.
I think I've heard similar things. I don't remember where exactly I heard it, but similar about like palm oil and shrimp farming as well. Is like
Mm.
that's more for export than for local use, I guess.
Yes, generally a lot of those things are for export. Um, you know, so yeah.
Yeah, and are those is it maybe a trickier question, but like are those things typically done by the locals because they need an income, or is it more like corporations deciding they want to do those things?
Well, it depends. Some of the companies will kind of convince local landowners to adopt those and give them a market to kind of sell it, right?
Mhm.
Um, so that's typically the way that it works. But
Mhm.
um, it's kind of hard to address the monoculture. That's one of Costa Rica's biggest challenges in general is the dependence on monocultures. So things like banana, pineapple,
Mhm.
um, and oil palm. The good thing is that, if this was considered a good thing, the palm oil situation in Costa Rica is not so much like um,
Mhm.
that we see in Southeast Asia, where they're currently clearing rainforests to grow palm oil. In Costa Rica, a lot of the palm oil that's expanding is expanding on old cattle pastures,
Mhm.
abandoned cattle pastures. So we're not seeing forest converted to oil palm, but more of a transition from grassland to oil palm.
Mhm.
But it still has its challenges because of the use of pesticides and insecticides, and that's one of the big challenges for these kind of monoculture crops. And the other simple point there is that if you think about like what happened with coronavirus is food security. If
Mhm.
people focus on producing just a handful of crops and not producing a diverse food system, it means that in a crisis situation, you don't have good food resilience. And so we have our own organic farm at our field station, and the goal there is to kind of have a kind of working display and a seed bank of alternatives that people can produce and grow in addition to these kind of monocultures.
Well,
Very
and I saw that y'all have a botanical garden as well, linked to, I believe, that same seed bank and greenhouse that you're talking about. How much did having experience with establishing this more botanical garden full of edibles inform your staff's ability to jump into reforesting the mangroves? Because you mentioned that you used a scientific process to kind of experiment with different techniques, and I'm guessing some of that probably started with the botanical garden.
Well, yeah, I mean, so we've been working on land on terrestrial reforestation for a good amount of time. So
Mhm.
we've probably planted now somewhere in the region of just over 400,000 um, native trees, and
Mhm.
so kind of typical rainforest. So we had a big vivero or a tree nursery established within the farm,
Mhm.
and so there are some similarities, but it is a completely different ecosystem. So we had a
Ah.
lot of learning to do. We
Mhm.
did establish a kind of typical vivero in the first year that we started to work in the mangroves. But we actually realized very quickly that direct planting was the way to go, and
Mhm.
establishing these kind of how we had done with the forested trees wasn't quite as efficient or effective. So we had we had some kind of techniques and know-how, but we certainly had to learn a lot working in the mangrove system.
Well, it's great seeing how you can take your earlier successes and build on those, but also not be stuck in a rut either. You weren't just like, well, this is how we did it before. We're going to keep doing it that way. We're going to
Yeah.
take the parts that work and reshuffle the ones that don't. And I saw we had a question from the chat that Kojo highlighted. Fizz Cannon asks, with things like the camera trap network bringing scientific value and eco-conscientiousness, how do you balance that with the tourism it must bring, which might be a risk to the environment that you hope to save?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a constant challenge, right? And I think balance is key to everything. If we looked at the scale of ecotourism right now in Ossa, it's not a kind of frightening elevated scale where we would consider, there's an extreme negative impact to wildlife. And we have to balance off the trade-off of what things were like before in the peninsula. So if we went right back to the 20s and the 30s, that's when there was a big movement of people, the first movement of people into the peninsula, and deforestation was going crazy, and so was the hunting. So those white-lipped peccaries that I was talking about that kind of look like a pig, they also taste like a pig. And so they were getting hunted en masse. And a lot of the freshwater systems in Ossa, there's a lot of gold. So there was a huge influx of gold miners. And inside where Corcovado National Park is now on the peninsula, there were well over 1,000 gold miners in there hunting, chopping down trees. And that was right up until the 60s. So everything was at the brink of being lost. And that was when Alvaro Ugalde, who's considered as, and Mario Bosa, who are both considered as the grandfathers of the national park system in Costa Rica, they came in and with other people like Dan Jansen, realized the value of this place that was, incredibly diverse, lots of endemic species, and it was on the brink of loss forever. Well, one of the alternatives to this lawlessness in the Wild West is to bring tourists. And so heavy levels of ecotourism might not exactly be what we want, but it's probably preferable to the kind of mass destruction of things. And so we've got to now find this healthy balance between sustainable jobs and livelihoods for people and bringing some economic value to the region, and also having space for wildlife. And I think as long as we have some regions where there's space for nature and then a space for ecotourism, I think we can balance things quite happily.
That makes sense. And as a follow-up question, obviously tourism just took a huge decline in the last year and a half. Were there any effects of that tourism decline that became evident in the ecosystem, or did it seem like things were pretty much going as usual from nature's standpoint? Because it seems like that would help you kind of gauge what sort of impact all that human activity has.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we do have some data from our camera traps over that period of when, kind of pre-pandemic and then during things. And we haven't kind of looked at any detail at the data to see if there's any signals there. We know that there were negative impacts for the wildlife, because when the tourism went away and a big dependence on the economy had gone away, there were some people within Ossa that had to revert back to the old way, and
within
kind
the
of
peninsula, Ossa, not within the conservation organization.
Yeah, not within not within our organization.
Your staff didn't run off. But
no, they weren't hungry because we've got our farm. So, but yeah, no, some locals did. But what was interesting is that there was a huge humane response, and there was a few local groups that raised. They went out and they raised money to bring in food packages for people. Our original sponsor of the mangrove program helped us go out and raise some money so that we could get food packages out to the communities working in the mangrove restoration project through that tough time. And then Costa Rica was lucky that things started to kind of build back this year. But it was a challenging time, but it was incredible to see how everybody kind of pulled together. And the other interesting aspect was that there were a lot of people in the peninsula that when the hunting started again, because of the lack of presence of tourists and lack of funding, there was an upcry, an uprising from within the local community of people that value nature and said, you know, we can't do this. We can't just like turn on nature as soon as times get hard. And I don't think that would have happened 50 years ago. And so that was a signal of how really there's been this generational shift within OSA where people value and see nature in a very different way.
Well, that's fantastic that you're making an impact without alienating the local community, and that they're actually embracing and understanding what you're doing. That's a very strong signal. Awesome.
Yeah.
Absolutely. In conservation, it's a hard field to work in. You know, resources are often extremely limited, and thanks to the help of organizations like you guys, you know, we can address that and change some of that. But it's a tough field because you've got to see the long view on this. And so working with kids and young people, we have to believe that there's a generational shift, you know. And we see that now, you know, everybody started talking about climate change 20, 30 years ago, and now it's coming to the point where that generational shift is starting to put pressure to see large scale political change. And so sometimes that being patient is really frustrating, but we have to believe in sowing the seeds.
Yeah. And on that note of sowing the seeds, like what are your favorite ways to uh what are your favorite ways to inspire others to have a mind shift instead of looking at nature as something to be used, more as something to be appreciated and conserved?
So I think about this a lot, and we honestly, like I used to think, should we be going in and doing kind of lectures and presentations in schools and classes? And then a couple of years ago, I was kind of trying to think about like why am I interested in nature? Like, so I'm obviously not from Costa Rica. I'm from the northwest of England. This place, you know, I haven't spent time there for a long time, but it's very industrial. It's where all the cotton mills are, and there's not a lot of wilderness and nature. It's there's some countryside, but it's full of sheep. Um, and so I asked myself, I was like, why am I like connected to nature? And I think back to this kids club when I was at school, and I remember like building a bird box at school and then putting it up in the garden when I got home, and then seeing this family of robins that came into the bird box. And it was those kind of like little experiences in nature that got me connected. And so we started a program just over a year ago that kind of aimed to really recreate that. But I have to say, there's been lots of organizations in OSA working with kids over the last 3 decades, you know, and I always think like we have to credit that we're standing on the shoulders now of people that have come before us and putting a lot of time and effort working in this place. And we're just kind of carrying that on. But we work with these kids to kind of not to kind of run them through a lecture, but to get them out in the rainforest, to get them out in the ocean and snorkeling and looking at the coral reefs. And it's those things. If we do that as kids, we'll stay connected to nature. I think we're all born naturalists. You know, we pop out of our mums and we're shoving things in our mouths and tasting things and learning about the world around us. And we're born as naturalists, but we lose it and it attenuates as we get older. So I think the longer that we can keep getting kids outdoors and into nature, even if it's just for a hike or climbing a tree, whatever it is, I think that has a profound impact on us in just the way that we see nature.
Mm.
Absolutely. I think when you mentioned that example, I was thinking like, what is one of my moments that I've had that would sort of connect me to nature in such a way? There were a few, but one that really sticks out is when I was in Puerto Rico, being able, like, one of the hosts pulled us aside, and he was like,
Mm.
come here," and he took us to this little stream that had come all the way down the mountain. And he was like, "All right, now hold your bottle. No, sorry, not hold your bottle. Like, set your bottle aside and just like drink straight from this stream that's coming down the mountain." And
Mhm.
it was the best water I've ever had. It was the most refreshing, the best tasting, just the most pure water I've ever had. And I realized at that moment that I had never had actual fresh water before. I had only
Mhm.
had processed water. And that blew my mind to just think about that fact. Yeah.
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 I couldn't agree more. It's that was a special moment for me. The same thing. I think maybe we had a similar experience where I'd been in this countryside in England, and then suddenly I went to the tropics for the first time and saw real wilderness and real
Mhm.
biodiversity and drank from a stream from the first time. And I was like, oh my God, this is what, the wild and nature is supposed to be like. And I think everybody should take their kids camping, even
Mhm.
if it's just in the garden. Like there's something
Mhm.
about find a stream, camp out, drink water from it, as long as it's safe.
Yeah. Before we move on to your next question, Corey, I want to say we should acknowledge that Junsu85 donated 25. So thank you, Junsu85. And DV8 from the code donated $15.01. So our grand total is now at $6,320.91. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you so much.
Amazing.
Yeah, actually, we have a very fun question in the chat from Fizz Cannon again. Thank you, Fizz, for all the great questions. Fizz is always super engaged in our interviews that we do. So Fizz asks, actually, does Andrew Whitworth have a question for the viewers and Minecrafters? So Andy, you have a question
Oh,
for us or
oh
chat?
wow. Wow, you guys have tripped me up there. So like we talked about a little bit about like so how do people play Minecraft? Like, is there a way that people get connected to nature playing Minecraft?
Well, I would say that one of the most captivating things about Minecraft is that the worlds are procedurally generated. And so every time you go into a new world, you don't know what the terrain is going to look like. And it instills a sense of reward for climbing over that next hill. And, a lot of kids these days, especially raised in urban environments, but even suburban environments, you don't have woods that you can just go explore, not
Mhm.
safely. And for a lot of us that grow up in more rural areas, some of those woods have hunters and stuff too, and so that's not exactly safe. And so I think that that's one way for some kids to kind of get that exploration bug that they might not have really hit them or bite them otherwise. What do you think,
Yeah.
Corey?
That's a really good point. And for me personally, as one of the designers, one of my passions with Minecraft is like every designer has their own sort of like vision for the game, and mine is to find ways to inspire people connections to the real world through Minecraft.
Mm.
So
Mhm.
adding bees is a really good example of that. When I was designing bees, I really wanted people to feel a connection to them and reassociate that thing in their head that says bees are scary, I should run away from them, and reassociate that as, oh, bees actually help pollinate crops. Bees are actually super useful, and they're also really nice as long as you don't disturb their habitat.
Mm.
That sort of thing. And like that's what I'm hoping to do with mangroves. And I think for me, Minecraft provides people a way of it's like a stepping stone into nature. And for me personally, I had never seen a birch tree in my entire life, but Minecraft had birch trees, and I thought they were the coolest looking thing ever. And when I moved to Sweden, they are everywhere. There are birch trees everywhere. That's almost the only tree here. And I
I
love
was
it.
gonna say, how have you never seen a birch tree? You
I
live in
just I
Sweden, but
hadn't,
okay.
but I did
Okay.
when I moved
No,
here,
but okay,
obviously.
now, yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
And I'm so happy every day walking around seeing these birch trees, but I don't think I would have had such an appreciation for them if I hadn't fallen in love with them through Minecraft first. And I
Mm.
think it provides a sort of connection that maybe people don't even like consciously think about, but it
yeah.
puts them in a sort of like almost nature situation where they're really feeling immersed in it in a similar way. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, I was gonna say we do have another question from the chat that I think is a very practical question. Before I read it though, we just got another $15 donation. So thank you to Tommy Scalaris for donating 15, who wrote a big heart. So thank you very much for that, Tammy Scalaris. But the question I was gonna forward from Eastwood, I think, is a really helpful question, and one that you probably could answer based on firsthand experience seeing tourists out there. How would you like to see tourists go visit Costa Rica without disturbing nature reserves? What are the dumb mistakes people make that they don't even realize are damaging? How could somebody who's well intentioned just avoid making like the simplest mistakes? What would you like to see more of?
Hmm. Good question. I think, most of the time from what I see of tourists is that, especially folks going to Costa Rica, is they're pretty mindful and they're going there because they want to see nature.
Mm-hmm.
There's always those kind of horrible things that you see online sometimes of people feeding the wildlife. It's
Mm-hmm.
never a good idea to feed the wildlife. I'd say that's a pretty fundamental trip up.
Mm-hmm.
Um, maybe like I've seen sometimes people hiking in national parks with, playing loud music.
Mm-hmm.
And again, not great for wildlife. Not great if you want to see wildlife either. Um, so those are pretty, I would say, a couple of fundamental things. So, and in a rainforest in particular, I mean, if you want to see some of that really cool stuff like tapirs and jaguars,
Mm-hmm.
you got to be pretty quiet as well. So if you like go around in like huge gaggles and you're like making a ton of noise, you're not as likely to see some of the coolest things as if you kind of hike nice and quiet and just go carefully. And when you do, you see so much more.
That's a fantastic tip, because even if you're going down there with a big group, you can pair off and pace or space yourself out as you go down the trail. If you're
Yeah,
still within eye shot of each other, you're less likely to get attacked by a jaguar, but you're more likely to see a jaguar.
exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's great.
Uh, I have actually, so we're getting close to running up on our time here, but I have one more
Mhm.
question for you. And it is about the Pleodendron costarricense. I don't know if I pronounced it right, but that's the plant.
I would do it even more wrong though, so you're good, Corey.
Well, I understand what you're talking about, so that's fine.
Yes. I was wondering if you could just tell the chat a little bit about that plant, because it seems like a really huge accomplishment of recent years, and I really would love for you to share that with us.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the story of this comes from, we struggle a lot these days as well, I would say, to fund what I would call like good old natural history, field biology. And so we got this great owner actually that's based in Switzerland, um, to fund a program to think about rare and threatened trees. And
Mhm.
obviously we know a fair amount about trees that are kind of easy to access, but we wanted to put together this botanical team that would go on the old school kind of exploration. They'd take their hammocks and they'd go for 10 days and live, in a really hard to reach place and
Mhm.
just survey trees and live in a hammock and eat rice and beans. And so they did a bunch of these expeditions in the most remote, tough to get places. And one of the botanists was walking along this stream, up in this hilltop, and I don't know how these guys do it. I mean, I'm a good wildlife ecologist, and I know a few of my, I'm okay as a with my trees, but this guy could spot one leaf in the whole leaf litter of the forest, and he knew it was something different and special.
Mhm.
And so he looks up and he finds this tree called Pleiodendron costarricense. So
Mhm.
Pleiodendron is the genus, costarricense is the species. And this tree was only described to science around, I think it's like 5 years ago, maybe.
Mhm.
And there was only ever, I think, 4 individuals found in
Mhm.
existence. And so our team on these expeditions found three of this tree. So the world's population was at seven known
Mhm.
individuals, and we couldn't find any saplings, any babies around these trees, but 2 of them were in fruit. And so our team climbed the tree and they collected the fruits. They put camera traps up in the tree to see what was eating the fruits. And it took our botanics team and our restoration team, I think, about 9 months to figure out how to get these seeds to germinate. They would not germinate. Cockroaches and ants would come and steal the seeds and take them away. It was crazy. And eventually they found this one hormone. It's like it simulates like an acid in the stomach,
Mhm.
and it managed to germinate these seeds. And last year, our team produced 70 of these trees that we planted this year. So we took the world's population from 7 to 70,
Wow.
um, and obviously now know the technique to reproduce more of these trees. But it's an ancient lineage of tree. It's a Canalacea, so it dates right back to the Oligocene. So extremely ancient. And what we found on the camera traps is that it wasn't like the monkeys that you might think would be feeding on these fruits. It was actually these weird kind of nocturnal animals that roam around in the canopy called kinkajous and olingos, which are part of the Proconidae family. And they were the ones that were feeding on these fruits, none of the monkeys. Um, but a super cool tree, and basically almost like a living dinosaur, a living fossil,
Mm.
and a really cool tree that we've hopefully we're going to be able to save that from extinction.
That is incredible. Even knowing the story and hearing it from you, it's even more incredible. It's so cool.
Yeah,
Gosh.
yeah, we were very excited about that tree. And you know, there's 2 trees that our team found on those expeditions that are new to science and still don't have names yet.
Oh, cool.
Wow. That's incredible. That must be so satisfying as well. That's really, really cool.
Yeah.
We have one more question, and I think we should end on that one because it's a really good question to end on, I would say. Joe, would you like to ask that one?
Uh,
I can ask it if not.
yeah, I was gonna say my summarizing skills, I might kind of cut this a little bit more than you would,
All right.
but basically someone wants to know what difference would hitting the goal of this fundraiser make. Like, Corey had mentioned to me that this could fund, if we hit $50,000, this could fund an entire season of mangrove repopulation. Could you talk a little bit about what that actually means?
Absolutely. So that kind of target for us allows us to have sufficient funds that we can have a technician working with the community,
Mhm.
and that we can pay the community sufficient funds that they can keep working throughout the year to harvest seeds, to clear back negrophora, and to plant um, around 10 hectares of negrophora and recover the mangrove population, and also to provide maintenance on those existing areas that we've been doing over the last couple of years. Um, so it's a huge bonus, not only to us and feel good that we can help get this work done, but to the livelihood to the community that's working there. So it's huge.
Mhm. Thank you. This has
Fantastic.
been so fun, Corey. Thank you for letting me help you out.
Joe, you're the best co-interview host. It's so much fun doing this with you. Andy, thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Andy. Dr. Andy,
Mhm.
thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Whitworth.
That's fine. I feel like we spent enough time that Andy's good with me.
Fair enough.
I want to say thanks to you guys, and to everybody who's donating and spending time. Like, I honestly cannot thank you enough. It was amazing when you first reached out to me, Corey, and what you're doing, not only driving the donations and the funds, but the amount of work that you're putting year on year into,
Mhm.
you know, building education, engagement in what's going on in the tropics, and how you're bringing some of those things into Minecraft that you mentioned. Huge, and don't underestimate that whole concept that you're building. So thank you.
I appreciate that. I appreciate those kind words a lot. And all right, so thank you both. We are going to pass the stream on. Actually, what we're going to do is we're going to switch to a BRB screen, which will have one of our lovely interviews with somebody from the OSA. So I'm going to do that, and we're going to pass over to that screen. And